Our beloved Baba says, I love you as you are. The following is from the Glimpses of the God-Man by Bal Natu. To be in the company of the God-Man and to serve him to his selfless satisfaction was not an easygoing affair. Those who stayed close to Baba had to pass time and again through fires. Sometimes the mind would rebel and the heart would be in low spirits. But the God-Man, being infinitely skillful, played with each of his companions a thrilling game to his farthest limits. The merits or the weaknesses of his followers and lovers did not matter much to Baba. He was and is concerned with their total and willing surrender to him. He is ready to accept anyone as he is. In the new life, Baba often stirred up the companions' emotions and then helped them to face their weaknesses. The plans and the many changes in the external aspect of the new life were made by Baba to keep the spirit of the new life intact while at the same time accommodating the natural weaknesses and proclivities in his companions. After all, he is the compassionate companion.
Today we're going to approach God Speaks from a maybe a slightly different perspective than all of us like to, which is as a kind of a very important book filled with information that Baba wanted us to read and absorb and understand, and to read it even if you didn't understand. So we're going to have fun looking at it from a different perspective. And I think most of the people who were raised in the West are familiar with the idea of verbum, or the word, that when God spoke the word, that is when creation came to be. And in Islamic tradition, in the Quran, it says, Kun fayakun. God said, be, and then there was. So in other words, it is associated with sound, with word, with speech. And of course, Baba spoke about his silence and the breaking of his silence and how that would be his second miracle. So when we read the title, God Speaks, from that perspective, our mind goes somewhere else, something much more significant than just a book of formulations. So let's think about what the avatar does when he comes. He comes to give a push to his creation. So on the one hand, he has the infinite power of divinity that he must stream down. And then on the other hand, he has the limitations and the boundaries of illusion at the time that he is coming down. And he has to be very careful if he's to bring change in those boundaries and to bring them up a notch and inch them forward, not to destroy them, because he needs creation so consciousness can evolve. So at one point, he has to balance this infinite energy and infinite divinity with infinite ignorance, and in the process, bring forward creation in ways that do not completely destroy it. Of course, the old boundaries have to be destroyed so that new ones can be created, which are higher. But he balances that tension between infinity and finiteness through his body. That is why he has to have a human body, because it is through the body that he does his work, and he brings those energies down and he balances them so carefully. And what he does is that he restructures his creation. And in the case of Baba being the avatar that came at the end of a cycle of cycles, and he said something is going to happen that has never happened before. This restructuring is going to be monumental. It's going to be immense. And so when the avatar comes and begins his restructuring, he does that on all planes of existence, including the physical plane. Usually begins at the higher planes, and then it has to be brought down and anchored at his most divine plane, which is the physical plane. The physical plane is the most divine because that is where all lessons of divinity are demonstrated and shown and integrated, where the highest and the lowest can integrate together. And that's why the feet of the master are so holy and are so revered, because his feet touch the ground, the earth, the physical plane. And that is where divinization shows its final victory over matter. And so when he does his restructuring of the physical plane, he has to anchor it down here. He has to pattern things down on in the physical world, and he has to meld that divine energy into the earth, into the ground. And he uses all the tools, all the ways, all the means that are available in the physical world to anchor that. You know, I'm sure you all know about the Duni fire and how perfect masters have a Duni, because that represents the divine fires of the sixth plane where creation begins to have its form. And so perfect masters have a Duni, and through that physical fire, they bring down the fires of Tesh, of the sixth plane. So Baba has to bring down and anchor that energy. He had a Duni, but he also did it in kind of innumerable other ways. For example, he worked with lepers. He worked with poor people. He, gave them cloth and grain and money. He created schools. He created hospitals. And these were the ways that he would anchor the new forms that are to emerge by creating concrete forms here on earth as archetypes. This kind of an anchoring is called an archetype. And because the avatar's consciousness connects with everything in creation, whatever he does affects all of creation. It is not possible for a divine consciousness to do something that does not have immediate powerful impact on all of it, because he's so tightly connected to all of it. And so are we, but we are not conscious of it. But he is conscious of it. And so he can use the structure of consciousness, of the mind of God, to precipitate these new forms, these new ways, this new restructuring that he's bringing about. So he creates these patterns or templates that will over time blossom into what they're supposed to be. But initially, he uses these archetypal means to seed, to anchor his divine work. So, if we were to look from this perspective at God Speaks, one might think that, well, does this look like Baba is materializing on paper a divine architecture, the architecture of consciousness, his consciousness? He is jotting it down, putting it on a piece of paper so he can work with it and do the restructuring that he needs with it. That's one way to look at it, that it was more than just giving us discourses, that it was actual work that he did, and that part of that work was to bring down, anchor the structure of the creation which he was going to restructure, that he was going to change. And by putting it down, he was able to anchor it. And so he said to his lovers, please read this book. It's going to help you. Of course, I think he knew that most of his creation at the time could not get beyond the idea of what is it in there for me. And so he said, read it for you. It's going to help you, which it is going to do that. But it has more to it. As we read it and we try to understand it, we bring it down and we help him anchor this new structure in his creation. And he said, read it multiple times. Well, he willed it so that in Iran, his lovers read it 25 times, at least parts of it, 25 times at least. And I'm saying that because he ignited his lovers in Iran, and they wanted to learn English so that they could read his works in English. And so they needed to learn English. And he put this idea out there that why not use God Speaks? That way, it's repetitious. There's a lot of repetition in God Speaks. So as a textbook where you need a lot of repetition, it's there. But also it's the one book that he said, I want everybody to read. And so it seemed like the perfect choice. And so his lovers in Iran would get together one day a week to read God Speaks, to learn English. And so we would all sit around the room. There were about 25 of us when everybody showed up. began with Mr. Vasali, who was the eldest in the group. And then his grandson was 6 years old, I think. He was there too, and everywhere in between. And so each person would read the sentence and would translate it. And then we'd all go and do that. And then we'd all decide what's the best translation for this sentence. And they would jot it down. And that's how the translation of God Speaks got started. And I don't remember how many pages we read, 60, 80, something. We didn't finish it, but we read a good part of the main part of it, which Baba called part 1. Then there is a supplement, and we'll talk about that. But we didn't get to the supplement. Oops. So the way that, I mean, it's incredible how much energy Baba put into creating this God Speaks book. Because it wasn't just what he dictated at the end of his life, not end of his life, but towards the end of his life in the 50s, that was printed. There was a lot of preparation that went into it as he was bringing down, anchoring, refining what he was going to say, what he was going to formulate, how he was going to do it. And that is what I'm going to cover here with you. And I'm using that wonderful insert that Ira Dietrich created for the latest edition or printing of God Speaks that came out. All of this information is in that booklet. It came with that, with the book, with God Speaks. There was an insert. I don't know, 20 pages or so. So it began, the initial parts of this God Speaks work began with that Baba's secret book. For those of you who don't know, in 1925, just as he was beginning his silence, Baba started to write a secret book that he would not show anyone. And he would work for it at months on end and long hours. Most of it in that table cabin that is now in Lower Merabad. And also he worked on it in the Jopti. And I think even before that, he may have worked on it in the tower, the water tank, which is now Upper Merabad building. At the time was a water tank. And so he would go inside through the window and be in seclusion in there. And I think he also wrote some of it there. So, and Baba would travel with this manuscript everywhere he went in those days. And he had the book in a locked box. And he would have one of the Mandali carry that box with him. And as you may know, when he came to the West the first time, Gandhi was on board, and he showed a few pages to Gandhi, and Gandhi was very impressed. And anyhow, but that's a different story. But so that is the book that still to this day, we don't know where it is, what he wrote, because he wrote it in his own hand. Now, there are books that have been found with interesting information that may have been some of what he wrote at that time, and some of that is in Baba's own handwriting. So that book, In God's Hand, and it has information that may have been that's part of that secret book. But Baba said at the time that what he had written in that book was just an initial draft or initial ideas that he was going to flesh out more fully and rewrite it later on. That's what he said at the time. that these were some initial ideas and concepts. So if we look at it from the lens of his trying to kind of put on paper the structure of the universe, these are the kind of outlines which he kept filling and filling and then refining and refining. You know, my more recent reading of God Speaks, which was not too long ago, the image that came to me was a master painter who uses, a very subtle paint and goes over the same design like 50 times or more, each time with a slightly different either color, shade, or even the same shade or color, but layer over layer over layer to make that more rich and more refined. And so the repetitions that I found in God Speaks struck me that way, that it was a master painter who was going over the designs multiple times to make sure that the shades and the nuances and everything was just right. And so that would be the restructuring, the refining that he did to the structure of his consciousness, which is what God Speaks is God's consciousness materialized. It is the word of God. It is how, when God spoke, creation came out, and creation came out as consciousness. So, and he said to all of us, read it, read it, read it. The thing is, we already have that structure within us. We already have divine consciousness embedded in us. We are not aware of it. And by reading Baba's God Speaks, it's going to affect that structure and adjust the readjustments that he made in that structure within us. And we're going to also help him anchor it. So it doesn't matter, he said, whether you understand it or you don't understand it, just read it. And we already know it, we already have it within us. And so by reading it, it goes to impact where it's supposed to have an impact. And Baba said, I've put, atomic bombs in this, in other words, divine energy into these words that you read. So it's going to impact you. It's going to have an effect on you. And so about his secret book, Baba said in 1927, this is just as he was finishing the writing, which he started in 2 years before. He said, this big book I have written will be the future Bible, Quran, Avesta, and Veda, as it will be universally accepted by all castes and creeds. So that's what he said in 1927. So now we fast forward 40 years to 1967 and see what he said about God Speaks, which came out. He said, as he was, dictating some points to Bauji, he said certain things, and I'm going to read what Bao said, that Baba had said. So he, Baba, would daily repeat that he had given 90% of the book he had written in 1925-26 in God Speaks. And the other 10% he was giving to Bao for the nothing and the everything. So when in 1927 5 or 6, Baba said, I'm going to refine this book. Well, it took 40 years to refine it. And actually, he worked on it till the very end of his life, and we'll talk about that. And so it was printed as God Speaks. And so and the other 10% he was giving to Bao for the nothing and everything. And then Bao continues. Erich would have to repeat this in the hall before the other men several times. In other words, Baba wanted Erich to repeat the fact that God Speaks was 10% of his original book, and that the rest of it he had given in nothing and everything. And also in 1952, Baba said the following: this book will be the first and last of its kind. He said the same thing that he had said about the original version of the book which he created in 1925. This book will be the first and the last of its kind. This book will be the Quran, the Bible, Avesta of Baba. It is unique. So he ties the arc of his work on God Speaks, traces his back to the very first writing of it, which was in the secret book. Now, before it was ready to be published as God Speaks, Baba put a lot of energy into the material that went into God Speaks in the following ways. So, as he was writing his secret book, he also at the same time was giving discourses to the Mandali about related information. And of course, in 1928, Baba gave very structural information about creation to the Premashram boys. And we've talked about how that information, which is now published in Creation and Its Causes, seemed to be a way for Baba to bring down and anchor his new design for his creation, and using the boys as a way to bring the energy that's needed to do that. So he put the structure on paper, told them about it. He would bring lamps and mirrors and all kinds of ways to anchor that structure here. And he would bring down the energy through the Pramashram boys, whom he would encourage to say, just love me, just love me, just love me. Don't worry about these words. Just love me. That's the way that energy flows, through love. And then the information that kind of was disseminated in many ways through different discourses, were published. Some of them, most of it, I think. But I think Ward thinks there is still some that's not published. The Infinite Intelligence, the Tiffin Lectures, Creation and Its Causes, and other books. There were discourses that Baba gave to Ramju, and those were printed in, I think, Meher Baba journals. And then, of course, the discourses that he gave that now have become the discourses are less structural. Nevertheless, the information fleshes out some parts of the structure that they later became the discourses. He gave those to when in 1938 the Meher Baba Journal was created, and then later Phyllis Fredericks published Ramju's works in The Awakener. So much of that material that was preparatory for God Speaks was disseminated in these ways and refined. But in addition to these discourses, there were other activities through which Baba empowered and leveraged to do the work that would go into God Speaks. One of them was a motion picture project. In 1934, he was very serious about a film project that he wanted Hollywood to create. And Baba described it this way. The film will actually demonstrate the purpose of creation, evolution, reincarnation, illumination, realization, the whole process of inner and outer progression up to the point of fulfillment of all life, which is union with God. The whole idea is that the topic of that film was all of what we see or what we read in God Speaks. And Baba dictated a complete scenario for the film. And in addition to that, there was another project that Baba used to prepare the material for God Speaks. And this one had to do with the following. For 10 days, he dictated to Adi K. Irani a chart on evolution, which was going to go and be part of the film. So he dictated points to Adi K. Irani for a chart that was going to accompany the film. And Adi said of the chart, he asked me to prepare the chart. He gave me all the points, and the chart was so big, it was 12 feet by 12 feet, even bigger. Can you imagine? It was a huge chart. With the help of 2 or 3 persons, I worked out the entire chart, and at every point I went and showed it to Baba. The diagrams were there in the chart of the evolution of the different forms, the transformation of one form into another, and their descriptions. They were all there. That chart was folded and kept along with Baba's book, that most important unpublished book. End of quotes. In other words, that chart was folded and put together with Baba's secret book. And Baba described the chart in a letter in 1934 in this way. He said, I'm preparing a detailed chart with illustrations explaining all the details about the creation, evolution, reincarnation, the planes, illumination, and realization for the film. So the years later, when Phyllis Fredericks saw that chart, which actually went into God Speaks, has seen the scenario for the film years later. And she said that the film scenario was like a miniature God Speaks. So the film itself was another way that Baba used to do the work that we have talked about that went into God Speaks. But that's not the end of it. And this is, I think, very remarkable what I'm going to tell you now. In 1943, Baba called to Mehrabad 125 followers who had sworn complete obedience to Baba and were ready to aid in his work. So 125 people had promised to follow Baba's orders. They were invited to Meherabad. The subject of the meeting was the divine theme chart, was this chart that Baba had asked Adi to put together, which he had provided all the details for. And you will find that that big chart was split into two, and you will find it on pages 224 and 226 of God Speaks. Let me see if I can try to show you the divine theme chart. So this is the one. I know you can't see the details, but if you go to your God Speaks, this is the chart. That this is one half of it, and then the other half of it is this one. So you can see how Baba minutely charts down the structure of his consciousness or creation in these charts so that he can tweak and play with them and restructure them. So during that meeting, Baba discoursed for 2 hours on May 17th, 1943, to explain the chart to them. Then he asked all at the meeting to meditate on the divine theme for 12 hours on the following day. So all of the 125 people were asked to meditate on that chart in which he had basically summarized the structure of his consciousness. And he said, you have to follow this very carefully since it is very important. You have to ponder over it tomorrow during the internal silence. I will make it so clear and easy that you will feel that you have got God in your grip. You will feel as if he is in your hands by intellectual conviction. So, by us having intellectual conviction, we are anchoring the new design that Baba has prepared for us. In 1943, he asked Dr. Duncan to go in a corner and meditate daily from 7 to 8 p.m. in the Jopti on this chart. So a very important chart that summarizes basically the evolution, involution, and all of that, and the states of God and whatnot. Now, for the material that eventually became what we see in God Speaks, Baba started to dictate to Dr. Ghani in 1947. And just before Baba asked him to do that, Baba had Dr. Ghani read Hafez's ghazals to him from late evening till 4 in the morning for 21 days. So he was charging Dr. Ghani to take down the dictations he was giving for God Speaks. And before he began that, for 21 days, he asked Dr. Ghani to be with him and read Hafez ghazals until 4 in the morning. But Dr. Ghani seemed to be progressing very, very slowly. He wasn't kind of keeping up with the speed. So Baba finally got fed up, and in 1948, Baba dictated an agreement, and he said, now I want you to sign this agreement that you will complete this by May of 1948. And Dr. Gandhi signed it. But even by November of 1948, he was not finished. But Baba continued dictating stuff, and Gandhi was behind schedule. So now we're going to fast forward to 1952. This is after Dr. Ghani has passed away. He passed away in 1951. And in 1952, as you know, Baba came to Myrtle Beach, to the United States. And this was his first meeting with groups after his new life. And the first people that he saw were Murshid Adus and Francis Brabazon. And during the 1952 meeting, he told Murshid Adus the following. He said, I dictated all the points to Dr. Ghani. He worked on it, and now I find half of it has not been included. Half has been just as I wanted. I have brought the manuscript here, and when I'm free, I will go through the whole thing and make necessary changes. So Baba was going to himself work with the manuscript of whatever Dr. Ghani had put together. So by the July of that year, Baba had reviewed everything, and he said, and mind you, part of that was his recovery from his accident in Yukon Dunes. And then he said, now I shall take this manuscript home, and I shall have to write the whole book over again. And then Baba began dictating the book again in August of 1953. So that is when the actual dictation to Erich of the material that we see in God Speaks began. But of course, all the pre-work for it, all the the drafts and the initial work for it had been done since 1925. Baba frequently referred to God Speaks as the book on the 10 states of God. The 10 states of God chart was dictated to Dr. Ghani as the basis for the original manuscript of God Speaks. So that's another chart that you'll find in God Speaks. And some of you may know that Dr. Ghani was a Sufi. He was a Sufi teacher. Actually, Baba asked him to begin a Sufi group in Pune, which he did, but there wasn't much interest in it. And so Baba said, forget it. So it's interesting that from the beginning of writing God Speaks, he pulled in Ghani, who was a Sufi, and then later he pulled in Murshid Adus and Don Stevens, who were Sufis, to publish the book, to make the grammar corrections and the punctuations and so forth. And so he was giving that work to his Sufis. And Baba said about Sufis, Zoroaster was the greatest Sufi. He was the father of Sufism, and its very foundation owes its creation to him. So Baba did not associate Sufism with Islam, because Sufis are a group of people who gather around the avatar to push his agenda forward for when he comes in next. And so, as you know, Baba has talked about how each avatar sets the stage for his next advent, but also lives what he had set the stage for in his previous advent. And so the Sufis are the ones who will, set the stage for his next advent. So God Speaks, as you look at it, it has a main part and then it has a supplement. The way the supplement came about was that Baba dictated the first part. And then he asked Murshid Adus, said, go through all the stuff that Ghani has prepared. And if any of it seems interesting to you, you can use it and put it as a supplement to God Speaks. However, when it got to reviewing the material, Baba reviewed all of it and made corrections to all of it, including the supplement. And there was a lot of, again, energy and effort in doing this because so here is what is from one of the letters that I think Mani wrote. It says, Baba wishes you to take as main foundation for God Speaks, manuscript number 1, which is the main part of God Speaks, dictated personally by Baba, leaving the sense in it entirety. In other words, you can change commas and break sentences, but keep the sense of it. And then manuscript number 2, take whatever you like from Ghani's work to add to Baba's manuscript number 1 for the book. Then send to Baba to the revised manuscript with any questions that you might have, and Baba will have it read to him and will return the final to you for printing. And of course, there were a lot of challenges in these very long sentences that were written in Indian English that had to be adjusted. And Don lived on one coast and Murshida lived on another coast. And so it wasn't easy, and they had a strict time frame to do this in. And then what happened? In November of 1954, Baba stopped using gestures. So it was extremely painstaking for Baba to communicate his corrections and his points after that. And Mani writes, apart from attending to it during the last days of his fast, it has been a very long and arduous task with infinite patience on Baba's part, for without the board or the ABC gestures, to have to convey sentences and technical terms or names to the secretaries, noting it down has been truly a divine job. So anyhow, they went through that and things were read to Baba. Baba was very pleased, and they sent it to, and then Mani writes how another Hindu disciple, meaning Bao, playing a strange role for overcoming the impossibility of conveying through ordinary gestures the terms or names in the Sufism and Vedantism, and sometimes a word or sentence not to be grasped through Baba's patiently repeating gestures. Baba would have the Hindu disciple recite the alphabet, A, B, C, D, and then stopping him when he got to the first letter, then A, B, C, D, stopping him when he got to the second letter. That way, he would have it spelled out what he wanted to say. So an enormous amount of energy, divine energy, has gone into this God Speaks. And it was, Baba wanted it to be published by a very major publisher, and it ended up being Dodd Mead. And the sale of the Fairfax property of Sufism was used for that printing, for that first printing. And Baba himself autographed 498 copies so that they could be sold at a higher price towards the expenses. Then another part of it that some folks find it interesting is that dedication, that Murshid Adus said, Baba, how about having a dedication to the book? And so the Mandli thought that was an interesting idea, and they asked Baba, and Mani writes, Baba uses gestures alone. It took my dense brain 10 whole minutes to get the wording he gives for the dedication. To the universe, the illusion that sustains reality. And I'm going to end this by reading something that Baba said. He said, I want you all to take particular note that I would feel happy if each one of you not only possessed, but read and digested God Speaks from the first to the last page as the last book of its kind by me. I will likewise be happy if those among you who can possibly do so will see that this book is translated and made available in as many languages as possible for those who cannot read and understand English. You will find God Speaks a very unique book. Never before have such things been disclosed by me. You will understand through your mind the why and wherefore of your being. And of course, he willed it that we have a Persian translation as well. Jai Baba.
I myself remember those classes, Farhad. They were wonderful, and we all felt it. They were, just, it was somehow so serious, though, in a way, so fun and learning about English, but they somehow had a certain very serious energy. I don't know if you ever felt that.
Well, it was a classroom. Yeah, it was a
But Baba
Baba's classroom. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. Just I wish those classes we could have again, but treasure those memories. Thank you so much. I see Elizabeth's hand is up. J Bob Elizabeth.
Hey, Baba. One of the things you said that I thought was really interesting was that the intellectual conviction would anchor the new design. That the intellectual conviction, I guess, of what is in God Speaks would help anchor in the new design for the next age that's coming. And I guess part of what went along with that, from what I understood from what you said, that I probably had heard of it, but I hadn't really focused on it, was the 125 people who were asked to meditate on the divine chart, and then you mentioned Dr. Donkin was asked to do the same thing, and then so that's kind of one thing. I have one more, but I'll wait and see what you say for that first.
Yeah, you see, the intellect has a bad name. People think that if it's intellectual, then it's anti-divine, anti-spiritual, and, not worth anything. But without the intellect, you can't have intuition. We can't go to the next. So kind of honing the intellect is extremely important, if for no other reason than to prepare us to make the next jump. But the idea of anchoring is that anything that we do in the physical world with our physical bodies and with our physical faculties, not the subtle ones or the etheric ones, but the physical, it brings the energy, it becomes a channel for energies to come down. And if we consider that our consciousness is really Baba's consciousness, except that we are not aware of all of it, by kind of getting into our system to whatever extent we can, things that Baba wants to be integrated in our system, we are affecting that structure. And that structure is going to be nurtured and nourished and uplifted by whatever it is that Baba wants to put in it. And so anchoring is putting all of that in the consciousness through the physical means that we have. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's the answer to your question, or I'm totally off.
No, I'm just trying to understand the fact that you have intellectual conviction is the way to anchor the new design.
Well, if you can get that conviction, so much the better. But there are people like me who don't understand much of it. So I can't even get that far. But the attempt and the kind of willingness or the effort that we put into trying to make it so, I think is what Baba is interested in. And that's why he said in some meetings, he would say, don't worry if you don't understand it, just read it. And so, but if you read it enough and you wait another, at least in my case, another million lives, it becomes a conviction. And, and that somehow aids Baba's work. And so it's worth it. I think at least that's my take on it.
And then what about the people that he asked to meditate? The ones who are
Right.
100% surrendering to his will, and he asked those people to meditate on the chart.
Yeah, that was another way that he wanted to energize and kind of give a push to that structure. He used their meditations and their focus and their energies. And, you know, if they're normal people, so they're probably, their minds wandered and whatnot, but they sat there, and that's what Baba needed, for them to sit there for 12 hours and try their best to do this. And he is the master of consciousness, and he can use that love that went into that willingness to sit there for 12 hours and do what Baba asked him to do, to channel that love in the direction of work that he wanted to do with God Speaks, through the chart that became part of God Speaks. And mind you, those charts are in the supplement. So one cannot kind of devalue the supplement, saying that, you know, it wasn't part of what Baba dictated originally. Baba worked very hard on that as well. And it includes the charts that he worked so hard on.
And then the final one has to do with Balji. And I'm just curious about the process that Baba used. It seems like he made it harder and harder to make this happen, you know, going from alphabet board to hand gestures. And then like I didn't realize that he would stop Balji at whatever the letter was so that he could put the word together to convey. So I'm wondering if there was a point in that process. I mean, was there a reason that Baba made it so hard I mean, it was meticulous, and he used a person again as a channel to do that.
Well, I can kind of share my take on these things. Well, it seems like Baba would use boundaries to channel energy. For example, he would say, he would put restrictions. You have to build this building in 1 week or 2 weeks, or I want my meal by certain time, or I want this thing to happen within this time frame. By putting these boundaries, one can channel the energy, just like water. If you don't have any boundaries on the side of a river, it'll just go all over the place. But if you want it to go in a certain direction towards a lake or whatever, you put boundaries around it so that it can be focused. And so, as we see in Baba's life, he put more and more and more boundaries around words and speech because he wanted silence to come down. First, he stopped speaking. Then he stopped using the slate that he used to write on. Then he stopped using the alphabet board. And so each step, he narrowed this channel so that the force would be stronger. I mean, that's one way to look at it. I don't know if it's the only way.
And it actually makes a lot of sense, especially when you think of the film where they use the dam to show how the energy of the water is channeled. And that was in one of the Baba films that was done about the Heartland Center, which came to mind as you were talking about this. I never thought about that before, that Baba was putting boundaries around words in order for the silence to come down and be more forceful. Thank you.
And a communication is going to be more, you see, the lower mind, as important as it is, it has more boundaries than it should. In other words, in the future, we won't need as many words to communicate what we need to communicate.
Meaning intuition will be the way of the communication.
Well, intuition is a different, thing. It has many dimensions to it, but it's not clairvoyance. It's not mind reading. It's not, if we have intuition, then, and we follow our intuition, we will ruin our personal advantage, because intuition serves the larger whole. It is a means by which we react to a much larger structure that we begin to find ourselves part of. We won't be narrow to this ego anymore. Over time, we will find that we are part of, all of humanity. And how do we know what to do best to serve this new whole that we are now part of? It's through intuition. Just like, the white blood cell image that I've used in the past is willing to sacrifice itself for the benefit of the body that it now finds is part of. And so, intuition is another interesting topic that I think we have touched on different ways, different times, but it's where we are headed.
Thank you very much for all the answers and for the presentation.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, wonderful.